So where we're headed with this, we're going to start with just the problem definition, really. What are some of the challenges and why is this an issue now? And then we'll talk about this idea of collaborative onboarding and why that's so important within the culture to making onboarding successful, and frankly, setting people up for success, and how that really pulls through within the culture and in other areas, right, to a high performing organization. We'll talk about the role of the sales manager and how we can engage them to own and personalize the onboarding, and then how we can really leverage some of the technology, which we'll share, and also peer-to-peer collaboration and peer-to-peer learning through the content that they're sharing and how they're going through that experience. And ultimately, what implementing a continuous learning and coaching program might look like. So we have a lot that we're going to tackle, but before we jump into that, Jake, I just wanted to start, and we've talked about this this Great Resignation, and this was an article that was published back a little bit ago. Actually, it's just been updated, but they look back over the 6 months ending in December, and it's over 4 million Americans have quit their jobs. That was for 6 months in a row, and it's continuing on. We hear about that, whether it's the reshuffling, realignment, as people are maybe choosing to go elsewhere for different reasons. But that's 50 million people, if you extend that out over a year, that are changing jobs, changing seats in one way or another. And actually jobs are being created. So it's not like those people are just going home and retiring, but in many cases they're going elsewhere. And so there's a whole other, I think, webinar to talk about why that's happening and what's going on there. But I think it really sets the stage for, well, now we're onboarding a lot of new folks, and we probably have some empty seats ourselves to fill. Jake, I'd love to hear, kind of what have you seen with that, across your clients, and how are they responding to that Great Resignation?
Yeah, this is a great point. This is fascinating. Gosh, 4 million people a month. That's almost like 1% of the whole population of the country every month changing jobs. It's probably, and obviously higher for just the workforce.
Yeah.
The thing, I think the biggest thing that we're seeing is that the tactics are, because of the change in tactics that we have to use, that organizations have to use for onboarding, because of so much with remote and everybody being in, and now hiring folks across time zones more, and being, just the change in the tactics has called for a lot of rethinking strategically. How are we, maybe, one organization we worked with, they were starting off, they'd always had like a 2-week onboarding program because a lot of it was in person. Now it's like, okay, well, we've got to rethink this whole thing because it's not in person anymore. We've got to redesign how we've got to really put more resources into the program because it's become just that much more critical. So, we're seeing a lot of strategic changes in how people approach training because of this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as they look around, or they may be, questioning kind of what's important to them, they're looking for organizations that have good training programs, that have an onboarding, that they can develop their careers. I heard somebody mention, 4 million people are leaving for 4 million different reasons, but we can start to pull out some trends of, oh, if they don't feel satisfied, if they don't feel recognized, if they don't have a good relationship with their manager, maybe they don't feel like they're developing their career, they're going to look elsewhere. And that's really what we want to lean into today, is what can we do then to create an environment where people want to come. And while we're onboarding those people, we're helping make them successful so that they're going to stay and hit their number, right? And be contributing members of the team. So let's talk about that. I'll open up a quick poll here, and I'd love to just we have a large audience here on board, but just to get a cross section of how many salespeople do you expect to hire and onboard in 2022? So in other words, how big is this problem for our audience today? We have individual practitioners or managers that may have a few openings on their team, and then we have sales enablement and sales leaders on our webinar today who maybe really ramping up the organization or shifting. So it'd be really interesting to see how the numbers work out here. All right, we're getting participation. We'll give it another 30 seconds or so. All right, thanks everyone for participating. I'm going to go ahead and close that out. And it's really interesting when we look at, we could probably extrapolate these numbers, but, over 30% of the audience is hiring 50 or more people this year. And that's staggering, right? That's obviously a huge onboarding challenge. We have a lot of enterprise clients, so they probably have a lot of openings. And another 35% are hiring, somewhere between 11 and 50. So almost 3/4 of our audience is, expecting to hire multiple people, more than 10 people. And obviously that creates some onboarding challenges as well. Jake, I'm curious, any observations on this and compared to what you're seeing across your clients?
This tracks pretty well. Obviously, so it always depends on company size, and like you mentioned around, maybe someone is thinking in terms of just their individual team versus a whole business division or whatever it might be. But yeah, this definitely tracks. I mean, we're seeing a huge amount of hiring across all of our customers, and across all the organizations that we work with. And it's so much of how the sales process is being done has changed. So it's like this combo of, new people, new process, selling virtually, now, and much higher standards as far as, this is become an employee's world now, right? In this work from home environment. So this definitely tracks.
Yeah, so I think it really validates that, yes, this is an issue. This is something that, people are considering, and we may need to be able to respond. I saw a LinkedIn post the other day saying, yeah, I have 100 openings for BDRs. It's like 100. And, obviously that's a challenge at scale, and you need to get them ramped up and, productive as quickly as possible. So one of the ways to look at this and think about it, which I think puts a fine point on it, is, the return on investment in ramp up and ramp up time is significant, because that sales rep is really providing a revenue stream, right? So they're adding revenue, or at least we hope that at some point they're adding revenue. And we're saying, well, how much is that? And how soon is that going to happen? So, if we can compress that and make them successful, they're going to contribute, and frankly, contribute to the team that much quicker. And even if it is in a BDR role or SDR role, that contribution is by booking appointments and working with AEs to close business. So we really want to think of, what does success look like? How long is that going to take? And what are they going to do when they get there? So one of the ways we look at this, and this is just a simple way, is we think about a ramp up period of what's the sales cycle for that particular organization. How long does it take to close a typical deal? And then we need to add at least 90 days just for the onboarding, for the ramp up, and to think about, okay, how can we extend that out? Some organizations have 3 to 6 month cycles, some maybe it's 12 to 18 months, but it takes a few times going through that process and the onboarding and the success. And what we're really interested in is, how can we compress that and make it most successful? And some of the things we're going to be talking about here shortly. Jake, how does this resonate with, kind of what you see with the onboarding in your clients?
Yeah, I'd say that that sort of time to productivity is such a huge, just such a big metric for how people judge the value of their onboarding program, the effectiveness of it. And that's absolutely true. Taking that first there's that couple month period where it's, they're not making a whole lot of progress against quota, but they're just getting themselves into some opportunities. Now, then it's, add into the length of the sales cycle. Yeah, this is exactly it. And one of the things to think about too is, are we counting as far as the first deal that they do? Are they fully ramped, or is it that they're, are we saying, okay, in a given, once they hit a certain revenue amount in a given time period, okay, now they're at fully ramped up. So just some different ways that we kind of see people gauge.
Yeah, and I think it's so important, Jake, to define those milestones, right? Time to first meeting, time to first deal, time where their pipeline is now at an appropriate level to support a quarterly quota, and then really time to now they're actually on quota or on target, steps along the way. And I think that's important, because you don't want to obviously wait till the end of the year and say, oh, they missed their number. Right. Like, well, no, where did we expect them to be at 30 days, at 90 days, at 120 days? and kind of have those built into the ramp up period. And I think there was a question about, well, what if you have a very short cycle or like a 21-day deal cycle? And I would say, I think that still applies, is let's define what do they need to do to be able to close deals, and how long does that training, I mean, maybe it's compressed if that's a pretty rapid sales cycle, but what do you need them to do to be able to be fully productive? And then how do we work back from that and define those milestones? So let's continue on. I mean, we like to look at these 4 questions as part of onboarding. And it's really, what do you want the sales rep to know and do? So the knowledge and skills, what's really required there? Where's the information located that they need to get access to? Maybe that's playbook, maybe that's sales enablement tools. Where do they go when they are looking for that? How does the rep actually perform the processes to do their job? So what does it look like to actually open a proposal or create a proposal, or even create a new opportunity in Salesforce, right? What are all of those processes that they will be required to do? And then who should the rep go to get things done? And is that the manager? Is that a sales enablement support? Is that a training person? I think we want to give them, the navigation, if you will, within the organization and where they're going. So that's kind of what we're looking for from the background. And then the specific skills and knowledge is, well, what are the key selling skills? What product knowledge do they need? What industry knowledge is it helpful or necessary for them to know? And then, what are the sales enablement tools, kind of the technology that's required? Jake, I know you address all of these within different programs with Allego, but how does that come out in a training program? We need to train them on the skills, but also there's all this product and industry information that they need.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for us, what we found is thinking in terms of, okay, what is the kind of information that breaking out where a person needs each given piece of information, and saying, okay, maybe we don't have to try to train everybody on all of these things up front, and try to say, okay, maybe if there's some, maybe we train everybody in onboarding on maybe the core value prop for the main persona that we're going to be speaking to, but maybe there's some other persona they'll talk to 10% of the time that we can then just put a just in time training resource for them available that they can access at the point of need. And thinking in terms of, okay, where are they going to need these different things? We don't need to train everybody on how to run the order processing system right in onboarding, because they haven't even gotten out on their first meeting yet. You know what I mean? So it's things like this that you can start to, if you've got a certain flavor of the messaging that is not as you're not going to be used all the time, things like that. So you can start to kind of and especially now with all the tools that we've got to be able to reach folks at closer to when they're actually going to apply the training. So that's kind of how we think about that.
Yeah, and I think one of the things we're get to is in the flow of work and just in time training, because one of the challenges is we can throw so much at people in their first onboarding period that it's just overwhelming. And it's like, well, I have these products I have to memorize, I have these technical specs, I have these skills I need to be able to apply, and these tools I have to use. What do they need to know to get to that first milestone? Maybe it is just booking appointments, or maybe it's joining calls and asking great questions. They can worry about closing later or pricing. So I think that's where rethinking, we don't need them to know everything from day one. We need them to know at different milestones the pieces to do their job, and then hopefully go out there and learn, because we know, and training industry has supported this in numerous studies, that people like to learn by doing and on the job with support, right? With coaching and other ways of doing that. So how do we give them enough to get out there and start learning in the flow of work? That's great. So let's get some feedback from the audience here. Love to know, I mean, obviously, many of you are onboarding large numbers of people. What are some of the challenges you're experiencing onboarding, especially given this hybrid environment? And Jake, we'll just keep an eye on the chat here, and be interesting to see. And please, if everyone would change their chat from panelists to everyone, or just so that we can see your responses. I think a lot of people have already done that, but it'd be interesting to see what the audience says. So Courtney says automation, and I think that's interesting. How that comes in. I'd love to explore that a little bit further, but what can you, I guess, ramp up and automate, and what do you need to have that collaboration, that face-to-face, that in-person? Mike says knowledge retention. So obviously we need them to actually take things away. And Kelsey mentioned virtual engagement. So keeping them engaged right during that process. What else resonates with you, Jake?
Yeah, I mean, we think about onboarding challenges, right? Retention, knowledge retention, and even, just employee retention and new hire retention, engagement, and automating, making it easier to build out the content. We see those as really the kind of the big, that's when we go across across industries. That's a huge thing that you see from everybody from as far as a challenge.
Yeah, and I love one of the themes here from Deborah and Holly. I think both mentioned, how do you help them feel part of the team, and how do they build relationships with others? And I love those comments because it really speaks to making it a collaborative experience. And it also addresses some of the other comments we're seeing about, well, how do you keep them engaged and make it positive so it doesn't feel like they're just drinking from a fire hose, right? Or going through boot camp, which may not be that engaging for them.
Yeah.
Wow, great audience participation here. Virtual versus in person. It's more difficult doing it virtual, Matt. I completely agree. And I think that's one of the things. How do we simulate as much as we can when we can't get together? And maybe we are still hybrid in the way that we have to do things. So we need to maximize those opportunities to collaborate as much as possible. Yeah, skill set, process, just-in-time training. So I think that's how can we put it into the flow of work, as we mentioned. Really great comments from everyone. The final theme I think I'm seeing here is about the manager's involvement, and I love that since that's one of our bullet points. But how can we get the manager involved so they know what's going on, so they're engaged, and that they're able to kind of take people coming out of onboarding and put them into the work and be very successful immediately, as opposed to a handoff, right? Where all of a sudden, okay, here's your new team, good luck, and you don't really know where they're starting from. Wow. Okay. So yeah, we'll wish we had time to cover all of these, but one other I'll mention, Thomas mentions keeping the content current, and there are great platforms out there, but it takes time and dollars to build the content and to keep it relevant. And I think that is one of the things that we can't underestimate is, yeah, it's great to have it there, but we need to keep it relevant and updated and make sure they have access to the information. So let's talk about, some of the challenges. We certainly have seen more pressure in onboarding, just because of the Great Resignation, and we have lots of people that we're ramping up. Maybe the processes are outdated. They're kind of built around an in-person or kind of a boot camp approach. And as many people pointed out, we need to be more flexible given the virtual nature. Lack of engagement and motivation, I think we definitely hit on that. If it feels like they're just being fed this information, or boring e-learning that people tend to maybe not pay as much attention to, and that having the reps dedicate the time that they need and to get really ramped up, and also to acclimate to the company culture, as a number of people mentioned. So these are kind of the challenges we're presented with, and what we want to talk about then is how do we address those. So we think that one of the ways to do that is through this collaborative learning type environment. And so I'll just give you kind of a framework or a schematic here, and Jake, you can chime in and share how this has worked for some of your clients. But we think that digital blended learning experience is a really successful way these days to address onboarding in kind of a hybrid world. And what that means is we're still delivering content, and that might be through micro learning videos, or maybe we are having VILT, ILT, but we're delivering the content, but that's not an end to itself. We're doing that as a way of priming the pump so that they can apply those skills. And so maybe they're doing some field work or some assignments that's related to that. Maybe they're going out and shadowing and applying those skills. and then coming back and discussing. So this idea of collaborative learning where there's a discussion board, maybe there's a live virtual session where they can get feedback from each other, but they're talking about it. And ideally, we're pulling in others from the organization, the sales managers, maybe top performing reps, but they're part of that experience to say, yeah, this is what it's really like to apply these tools or to engage with the client, listening to call recordings, et cetera. And then they have easy access to the tools and the resources, so they know where to go. That was one of our objectives. And so whether that's in the same platform or a sales enablement tool, but they can get access to check in and make sure they're on track. And then, even knowing that they've completed. So what is it that we're looking for them to do? That could be through quizzes and assignments, but we're providing some way of gamifying that progress. So at the end, they're like, yes, I've actually accomplished. It's a great way for the managers to check in and see, well, how's my team doing, right? How are they moving along? So, Jake, I know from a Allego standpoint, you address these in a number of different ways, but I'd love to hear, we'll have some case studies later, but how this comes to life for some of you, your clients with Allego.
Yeah, it's a great one. I think the biggest thing that we've seen, especially again, given the changes with the in the remote environment, it's just that in the past, that top one, micro learning and VILT, ILT, you could give 60-70% of the effort that was dedicated to the onboarding program and the types of content. So much of it was skewed toward the VILT, ILT. And then now we've kind of realized that, and this is again something we've seen across the board in all different industries, is that you can't just take an all day in-person training session during onboarding and just say, okay, we'll do a VILT all day. It doesn't work like that. You don't get the same level of there's just not the same energy in the room. It's not a one-to-one. So now, okay, so then what do? We have to employ a lot of different tactics now, different types of content, field application, or skill application ability to, doing kind of more interactive exercises, taking more advantage of asynchronous. Somebody mentioned, creating asynchronous content can be a challenge. That's absolutely true. And that's why now this is even more of a challenge, because now asynchronous content is playing so much more of a role. So we're absolutely seeing this, and we're actually seeing a lot of organizations who had a 2-week boot camp. It's now like a 5-week program that is much more slow. Like, you do it more at your own pace, and it's more broken up, asynchronous. And it's really, it's more effective. I mean, it's really taking more time to give this kind of multimodal experience. So yeah, this is absolutely on point.
No, and I'm glad you pointed that out, Jake, because I think we saw that a lot, especially during the early parts of the pandemic, where people literally just had to take their ILT programs and deliver them online, right? Because they had to keep going and there wasn't much else to do. But unless you really rethink how that program is architected, the instructional design and the outcomes you're looking for, we all saw that Zoom fatigue, training fatigue, and there's, I don't know, many things worse than sitting through a 6-hour virtual training session and trying to stay engaged. Versus, as you mentioned, we're actually seeing a little bit of a silver lining where if you chunk that up over a period of weeks, now you have that spaced learning, you have time to apply and reflect in between, you can collaborate offline, through social channels, and kind of keep the training alive, and the outcomes improve, the satisfaction scores improve, and ultimately we're getting them where we need them to be, which is to be able to apply the skills to their job.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yep.
That's great. So I know you have some examples, and wanted to talk about that idea of learning in the moment of need. Maybe you could walk us through this slide and how focusing on that first is so effective.
Yeah, that's awesome. So this is what we kind of just looked at, the schematic with the different tactics. This is how we think about sort of rolling those up into these different categories, and then thinking about, okay, how do we break out the different levels of knowledge that we need to have people attain at different stages, and how do we invest resources? Like I said, in the past, it was so much more around e-learning and live sessions, and that's where so much more of the investment was done, and a lot to do with that's how it was always done. We didn't have as much of the technology to reach people closer to that moment of need when they apply it. But the problem was there was this big gap that you can see, right? By the time people go and turn around and apply what they've learned, it's maybe too much time in between, and they might have forgotten it, right? You know, everyone, knowledge retention was a big thing. And so actually, if you go, there should be, I don't know if there we go. Yeah.
There it
So
is.
then when you think about, okay, this is what we tend to kind of recommend when we're working with different organizations, building out or refreshing or revamping onboarding. It's like, okay, spread the resources across these different tactics and these different types of content that are themselves more geared toward different moments, you know, throughout the journey between when the training happened and the moment that it's going to be applied by the person. So, you know, you might, you know, you always have to have your, you know, stand and deliver training and your live sessions. And then you want to do some type of a certification and an assessment. But then maybe dedicating more resources to, you know, reinforcement tactics. You know, there's a lot of really cool things that you can do as far as automating reinforcement. If you take, you know, if you have a bunch of learners going through an onboarding program at the end, maybe there's, you know, there's several quiz, you know, maybe there's a quiz with, you know, 20 questions or whatever. You can actually take that and then say, okay, let me put that into like almost like a flashcard deck and have that sent out to learners, you know, every day for 30 seconds a day, and they just have to answer questions, and they get hit with just like 1 or 2 questions a day for several weeks, and the software can detect if they're doing well or what topics, you know, and so it makes it programmatic, to take everything that you've done in your training program and now say, okay, let me continue hitting them with these drills over time, obviously doing coaching and being able to see how folks did in training. If you're, you know, you're able to see what are the skill areas they need improvement on. Okay, let's target that when we deliver coaching. And then finally, this just-in-time material, thinking, okay, what kinds of things can we break off into short, bite-sized, engaging pieces of content, learning content, that we can make available right up to that moment of need. And it drives better results. It's closer to where the business is happening. And like everything like you just said, where it's now we're kind of being forced to do more of this stuff.
Right. No, and there was a comment I think is very relevant about, well, the certification piece, you know, how do we manage that? And especially if we have limited resources, you know, what does that look like? And I think that's where the technology is really helping enable that. Because like you said, if it's, you know, quizzes and flashcards, or if it's an assignment they have to complete or engagement, we can measure that. And so whether we're assigning points or at least different milestones, we can track that. And I mean, we use Credly, we partner with them as a badging capability to say, well, what does, you know, completion look like? They have to do X number of assignments, or they have to engage in X number of hours, and they have to be able to demonstrate X, Y, and Z. So make it, you know, fairly straightforward, but we can then look at those things and capture them, as opposed to having to have somebody, you know, present orally in front of a board or something, which is, you know, pretty laborious. So I think we can leverage the technology. I know you have some case studies, so maybe you could speak to that, Jake. You know, one of the areas, the ways that you applied this at Veritas.
Yeah, so this is Veritas, a global software company, technology company, highly distributed sales team, right? And they were, you know, having to revamp their onboarding program because of this, all these changes. And so they did what we just showed in the previous slide, basically taking all of the resources and all of the kind of the knowledge points and different things that they knew that people had to come away from the program with, and said, okay, maybe there are certain things that we can break out across over time, make them, you know, sharing pieces of content with key information or learning in them, in the opportunity in a seller's, in the CRM, right? We can see, hey, they're going up, you know, they're going against this competitor. Let's give them the, you know, the one sheet on how to go against that competitor or whatever it might be. So they were able to really kind of take their onboarding program, and as you can see, flipped the classroom. You know, started with, you know, hey, here's a cut here. It's, you know, before folks came in to the actual training, they were giving them pre-work, short videos, intros from leadership, things to get them acclimated before they join, and then join the company. And then they're able to start to go and do some of these asynchronous content. You know, one thing that was really interesting, they were able to do certifications, like a sales messaging kind of certification where using video. So instead of having to get up in front of and bring everybody, stand in front of a small committee of folks or whoever it might be to certify that they've got the message down after onboarding, they were able to use these video certifications. And so you can set it up. You can have the salesperson do it on their own time. You can give them an example of what good looks like. This is what they did from a top seller. And then they had a rubric and they were able to get managers involved in helping to score. And so this is where, you can start to scale your efforts a little bit. And speaking to some of the questions that we've gotten around, how do you handle certification with limited resources? If you can give your managers tools to be able to be involved in the onboarding process, because ultimately those managers will be the ones who have to then take the salespeople and continue their development from there. So the more, so Veritas is able to get managers more involved in the onboarding process. And then ultimately they also, they went for using a single technology for all of this stuff. So they were able to then take, these short bite-sized pieces of content, put them into playbooks next to their marketing material, all this other great stuff as they were coming out of the onboarding program. But it really drove just greater engagement among all of their new hires, drove better manager involvement in the onboarding process, which, that drives a better relationship between reps and managers. So it was all around definitely a win. Cool story.
Yeah, no, it's a great story. And I think it actually speaks to a couple of questions that came up as well about, defining the knowledge and skills and really understanding what the outcomes of the program need to look like. And I think it is critical. I mean, the question of, do you need to define competencies, knowledge, and skills for the onboarding? I think we at least need to define what outcomes look like. What are we trying to do at the end of this? Like we said, are they able to deliver the pitch? Are they able to respond to certain objections? Are they able to have a good value, discussion or presentation? We absolutely have to define those. And I think it was Aaron that mentioned, is there a difference between a TLS versus a BDR in terms of the hiring process and the competencies? I'm thinking that's, kind of between a revenue producer and maybe somebody who's booking appointments. I think absolutely you have to define, because the skills are going to be different. The ramp up period is going to be different, and what you're expecting at the end of the day. And so I think we need to be able to define that, as you discussed here, and then have them prove it. And, whether that's through use of video, through doing an assignment, and I'm less of a fan of just a knowledge check, because salespeople don't like to be quizzed and just pass a test, but can they apply that skill in more or less a real life situation? That's a great story. So I know the other thing is, and this is really interesting, that, we say onboarding starts at the time of the acceptance letter, right? So, maybe they're not even starting for a month, but that's really where their experience with the organization, it starts with recruiting, but then they've accepted, they're on board. But in these days, we really need to greet them and make them feel part of the team. Can you talk about, there's some interesting ways you guys are leveraging asynchronous, even maybe before they start the onboarding process?
Yeah, so that's absolutely true. Obviously, the onboarding process, it does start with, it may unofficially, but it starts at the signing of the contract for sure. I love that. One of the big things that we've seen is, around, speeding up this process of getting new reps acculturated. Obviously, that's one of the big challenges with onboarding is kind of, and a couple of folks talked about this, where driving a sense of community and, getting folks, to acclimated to the culture and all of that. So, a lot of organizations that we're working with, doing more of this kind of new tactics. One of them is, using, making available a lot of this knowledge sharing content and peer generated and video type of content, where it's a lot of people's faces and them talking, or examples of folks on sales calls, footage of them, taking that and saying, okay, this can be really good pre-boarding kind of content to give to new hires before they start their actual training, so they can start to get a feel for, okay, these are what some good examples of actual sales calls. They actually can see their future colleagues, who they're about to be working with, on handling calls, talking to clients, maybe, demonstrating different things, how to present something, how to here's how I handle this objection that we always get. So it gives folks a taste for what they're going to be encountering when they join the company. And this is before they ever start. And they're able to, it's a lot of people's faces, and they're able to see who they're going to, who they're going to work with. And there's a lot of cool stuff that you can do with collaborating. Another really important piece that I didn't mention here in the bullets, but I just thought of it. It's using, and then when folks do onboard, doing an employee video directory. This has been a huge win that we've seen across organizations, basically saying, okay, we're going to have a place within the enablement platform to say, okay, this is where all new hires by different role or region or wherever, create a 30-second video just introing themselves, what's one thing about them, who do they, what do they like, what are their interests, etc. Just one cool fact, whatever it might be, 30 seconds. Yep. And it, you get them pronouncing their name, so that way if they have, maybe a non-Eurocentric name, you can see, have an example of them pronouncing it, so that way leadership and people who are going to be interacting with them pronounce their name correctly, and see faces and put faces to names and things like that. So there's a lot of cool tactics here, but that's just kind of the high level.
Yeah, I think that's really important to make the connection. And I think you're right. If somebody's watched videos of, the CEO or their leaders on board, they feel like they know that person, right? So when they meet them, it's like, oh yeah, no, I know you. And it's like, well, who are you? But they've made that connection. They've seen the smiling face, and they've had, learned from what that person has to say. I think that's really great. And then the collaboration piece, being able to see that they're engaged and learn from each other. Deborah brought up a point about, hey, you don't want to put them on the spot. Maybe you make that optional, or make it less stressful, make it very easy to do, short and fun. And I think that's really important. I mean, even in our training programs, the first activity they do in an online platform is just to introduce themselves with a fun picture and a little bit about themselves. And in many cases, they've never met their peers, even if they've been there for a while, but now they're connecting. And so as they go through that learning experience, they know, oh, I can call Jake because he's been here and I know his expertise. And I also know that he likes the same hobbies I do. So, we've connected and bonded over that. So I think it's a great point. If we can do that by video or in a social platform, it just creates that culture and that connection that much further. All right, well, I know we have a lot to get through. So let's transition a little bit here to the role of the manager in onboarding. And we said, hey, that's important. Obviously, they're going to inherit the finished product, if you will, after onboarding. But we think they should get involved throughout. So, maybe I'm prejudicing the question a little bit, but I'd love to hear from the group just in the chat. What is your manager's role in onboarding within your organization? So where do they get involved? What kind of activities, or, are they not really involved until after the person has gone through that initial training? Love to hear, what have you seen with this, Jake?
So it's definitely a mixed bag. The most effective organizations, it's the managers are more involved than less involved. But for sure, a mixed bag across the board. I think that now, as we're seeing, we see that it's well known that a manager's role, that a manager is like the number one reason why a person might stay or go. Right, an employee, as far as their manager. So I think that now we're seeing more recognition that the managers need to be more involved in the onboarding process, as we're really trying to combat this great resignation, right? So it's super important to getting managers involved, even if it's just giving some feedback on a role play session, or maybe even just one interaction, that goes a long way with new reps.
Yeah, and we're seeing a mix, from involved from day one, very involved, to, maybe they're not as involved, and it seems like it's a handoff, at the point that they've finished new employee orientation, or they've gone through onboarding. And so I think we do see that. I think the point is, how can we get the managers more involved? Obviously, we want them to know that employee, develop the relationship and the experience. And frankly, I think it's so valuable when they see them going through where are they excelling, maybe where are they struggling. So they know that person when they come to the team. And with, I think, the technology platforms, the managers are able to do that easier these days. So they can check in and maybe they can see those assignments they're doing, or maybe they can watch the videos that they've produced. And so we encourage the managers to be very involved in that so that at least they see the progress and they're able to say, hey, I'm really excited, you're halfway through. And here's some things to think about, before you get to the team. Again, so it's not like a handoff of, okay, now they're ready, and it's up to you to make it work. Yeah. So good responses from the group. So, we think that, empowering the managers to lead. So having access to and sharing the best practices, providing opportunities for the reps to practice and get feedback. Again, maybe that's through the online platform or through videos. So they're seeing and being able to start that coaching conversation early, as opposed to when they're out with clients, but they're really helping to coach. And it also offloads a little bit from the training team, that they have to be everywhere and doing everything, but the managers are also owning that. So the other piece of this that's really important is just that peer-to-peer content. And I know you have some examples here as well, but let's talk about that, because I think if they can learn from each other, obviously that's a great way to scale, and also very valuable because they probably respect what their peers are doing and there's a lot they can learn. So maybe you could walk us through this as well in terms of how that Agile content comes into play.
Yeah, that's yep. So this, obviously salespeople want to learn from other salespeople. One of the big challenges that someone mentioned in the chat is shadowing can be a challenge, right? And shadowing is, really such a valuable tool for training as a salesperson, especially a new person. And actually, Ray, if you could go ahead and just build out, might as well just build out. Yeah, perfect. This is it basically, okay, it's like, how can we capture and bottle the sort of lightning in a bottle, these great moments that salespeople have. So that way we don't have to have folks shadowing one another necessarily physically, but we can make it available on demand, these clips. And so that's what Agile content is all about. We've seen a lot of organizations adopting this. It's basically, there's lots of different sources of it. It could be, a seller coming out of a call, and there's a piece of competitive intelligence that they just gleaned and they want to share that with their team, capture a quick video, share it into the system. All they have to do is one click. They don't have to think about where it should go. The system automatically routes it and it gets curated, and then rerouted to another person who's about to walk into a situation with that competitor, right? Per the CRM. Or maybe it's a clip from a recorded sales call that you've got served up by the system telling you, hey, here's a great example of the messaging of this new messaging, right? And you take that 2 minutes and it's a video. Just basically making it really easy and having these different channels to source this peer kind of generated content, and then being able to say, okay, having configurable, having the ability to curate on kind of in an automated way with auto tagging and with things like that, and making this content available to others, putting it in playbooks. We've seen a huge amount of success with taking examples from, say, an organization maybe runs a sales certification for a new message, and they get videos coming in of reps delivering the message, and there's maybe one or two real pieces of gold of like just how exactly we think this should be delivered. Well, let's make those available. We can take, you put them into playbooks, put them into a playbook alongside the deck that we want to make available to others. Basically just taking all of the best sort of knowledge and skills that people acquire on the front lines and just allowing that, putting process around that is basically what it is. So, this has been something that it's definitely, it's a newer kind of a way of approaching this problem, but we've seen a lot of success with this.
Yeah, and I think video has evolved where people, one, they're okay watching. It doesn't have to be Hollywood produced, studio quality video. It's much more about the authentic nature and the quality of the content, and then being able to provide that where it matters. So one of the things we've done, and it's been really interesting, is interviewing some of the super sellers or experienced people, set a series of questions and curating that into voice of the seller videos, really just little micro videos. And that's so much more valuable, I think, than some talking head or actor trying to lecture on the topic. But we had one client where we interviewed a dozen global black belts around the world, right? So these are the best of the best. Said, okay, well, how are you responding to this challenge, or what comes up? And then having that was so valuable for everyone to be able to consume, right, and provide that. So to your point, you can curate that, you can make it available, incorporate it into the platform or into the playbook. I think that's on the theme of, yeah, let's capture what's working and let's really promote that, right?
This is the same thing. It's looking among call clips and saying, okay, this is another source, right? Being able to say, okay, here's examples of a great salesperson delivering this message, or maybe I can go in and as a rep, I can type into the search whatever the objection is that I want to hear from how others handle it, and then the system can pull in. Here's the top 5 2-minute clips of other salespeople handling that objection. It just starts to be really, really powerful with what you can do with artificial intelligence, and now that it's automatically transcribing all these videos and pulling out topics and stuff like that. So there's some cool stuff.
Yeah, no, I love that. And, tying it to the point, either where they're in the sales process, or as comment about tying it to the CRM, but hey, you're in this stage. Well, great. Here are the objections that come up at this stage, or here's a primer on negotiation, before you go into that stage. So I think there are ways to put that right at the point of need.
Yeah.
All right. So the last, and so that's really leveraging that peer-to-peer and just-in-time content, and then kind of tying it all together with coaching, and really providing relevant content for continuous learning and bringing the managers in. Maybe you could speak to this slide as well.
Yeah, so it's basically the ability to say, okay, where can we reach salespeople? What are the different tools that they're working in, and how can we meet them at their point of need with whatever it might be, coaching, content, recommendations for an asset to use, and that's kind of what this is all about. It's basically saying, okay, let's take the like we've been talking about, let's take the content that we know we can surface at the point of need, right? If it's some deep dive on a topic that people have to go through a training session on, we can't put that at the point of need, right? But there's a lot of stuff that we teach folks in training and in onboarding that we can say and put it into a playbook that they can access on demand, or we can surface it to them. You've got show here this recommendation feed within the enablement app, or maybe it's even right within their CRM. And so it's just about being able to continue the onboarding process and create a better bridge between onboarding and when they actually get out into the field and they're going through with their manager and they're getting coaching and their development is continuing, making that ramp smoother.
Yeah, no, that's great. And then really enabling the managers to be able to coach, right? Having the tools to do that. And we know that coaching creates leverage, right? We want them to be able to solve their own problems and ultimately not call us for every deal or every fire. But I think one of the things to think about is just how we can do coaching in this world. So it's not just, oh, we used to be able to go out and ride along maybe, or join them on sales calls, but we can coach before the call, kind of, hey, let's play this out. I'll be the client. Let's practice. Let me join, and we'll have a joint sales call or a coaching call. Now with Gong and other platforms and analytics, we can actually after the fact go back and say, well, let's see what really happened here. And maybe that conversational intelligence, you talked 80% of the time during that call. Let's talk about why we didn't uncover the customer's need because you were too busy pitching. So there are lots of different ways that coaching comes in, but I think we need to work this into that onboarding to say, okay, here's the environment that we're training. Here's what we're expecting them to do. And when you go out in the field, this is how we're going to apply it, and starting that kind of coaching mindset as early as possible. So lots of good ways that we can kind of practice and simulate that. And then really coaching, for reinforcement. So on your earlier slide, Jake, you had that idea of it's not just getting them to the knowledge and skills and certification, but we need to continue to reinforce, and that's really where the manager steps in. Maybe you can talk about how you guys are approaching that with Allego. I know we just have a few minutes here.
Yeah, it's like you mentioned, conversation intelligence, right? It's being able to say, okay, automating all of the recorded calls, the recording of all the calls, and then just basically creating a layer, a filter to over all of them, just to pull out the topics that are discussed, the talk times, the the word, how fast are they speaking? What, maybe there's keywords that, that they're not touching on that they should, whatever it might be. And so this gives you the ability to start to scale your coaching efforts across the whole team, right? You obviously, as a manager, you can't do ride-alongs with every call, but I mean, with every seller, right, every week. But with something like this, you can listen in on calls from every seller of yours every week, because it's like you don't have to do all this scheduling. So it just creating more efficiencies, I think, is the kind of the name of the game.
Yeah, it's a new world, and I think it's really hard to join a call, but we can do that now in different ways. So it's not an excuse to say, oh, we can't be out there with them, so we can't coach. Actually, guess what? There are more ways to coach and more tools. And as you mentioned, what can we bring from artificial or conversation intelligence that now informs that conversation and helps it be much more tangible about focusing on the behaviors, as opposed to, oh, this was good or this was bad, or we didn't accomplish the objective. So you can speak to this as well.
Yeah, and this is that it's basically saying, okay, we can additionally, right, help sellers kind of coach themselves, give them a first line of, okay, here's some insights. We saw that there's a couple warnings here. You maybe said this messaging incorrectly, or you talked about made a promise in your messaging that you should have made about the product, whatever it might be. So that's really what this is all about. It's making it easier for managers to coach, because you're giving reps more self-coaching tools. That way, by the time the manager gets to them, they've practiced a little bit more with some help.
Right. No, and I think, it's a great technology. It's evolving. I think there's a lot there, and it doesn't work for everyone. And, there was a comment that, well, wait a minute, in some areas, you can't record calls, or there's a lot more sensitivity around that. And I think in that case, we have to, go back to, well, then can we join that call? And, once a week, once a month, we're actually going to be a participant, and we're going to use that as a coaching call to observe. And maybe we're co-selling, but we're also have a coaching objective that we're bringing in. Or maybe we're even just doing after the fact, well, let's replay that. What did the client say? What did you say? How did it go? What did you think of the call? And what might you do differently? So I think we can still coach, but having the analytics and having the recording obviously gives us a lot to have a rich conversation there. So no, this has been great, and we've covered a lot of ground. So I'll just kind of wrap things up. We talked about onboarding and some of the challenges in the hybrid environment, and hopefully we've kind of addressed some of the practices related to that. Making it collaborative and bringing in that peer-to-peer and in the flow of work, and just how valuable that is to see what's actually working and learning from others, as opposed to maybe a traditional lecture-based boot camp or new hire orientation, right? So the more we can make that relevant and live, and then bringing the manager in, from a coaching and an involvement standpoint, I think is really critical to making it work long-term. And so, we've had great discussions. I think there was also one comment about, well, what if people are coming in at different points in the process? How do we measure? I think the technology does enable us to have people at different work streams and along the way, and measure what the outcome is that we're looking for. Do they have the skills? Are they able to apply it? Have they made it through the process? As opposed to having to track, everybody individually. So we've covered a lot of ground. I guess any other takeaways or anything you'd like to share here, Jake, before we wrap up?
I think the key is just really about, the more you can do to drive that engagement up front. That's probably, the biggest lever that you've got, as far as, driving that engagement. Anything that you can do to help new hires get acclimated to the culture more quickly, become more, a part of the team, feel more a part of the team. That is such a huge, lever. And then all the other stuff we talked about as well, with getting managers involved, that's absolutely critical. So, and then these new tactics, right? Those are the kind of the three big things I'd say. These shifting new bucket of tactics, making sure managers are more involved than ever, and doing everything you can to drive that engagement and that acculturation.